Hello and welcome to the Aig-Imoukhuede Foundation podcast, where we engage thought leaders and change agents working to build a better, more effective public sector in Africa. I am your host, Ofoe Aig-Imoukhuede, Executive Vice Chair at the Foundation. Today's episode is one I am particularly excited about. We're digging into something that powers every effective policy, every successful program, and every real reform, but often doesn't get the spotlight it deserves: data. So we've titled this episode, The Power of Data, How Metrics Drive Reform, because data goes beyond statistics. It is the insights that drive better decisions and ultimately the key to creating real impact. Today, we will be pulling back the curtain on the Foundation's Public Sector Performance Index, how it works, what it measures, and how we're using it to support public sector transformation. Joining me for this important conversation are three distinguished guests with unparalleled experience and insights that they bring today. First guest is Dr. Adedeji Adeniran. Dr. Adeniran is a seasoned development economist with expertise in human capital development, tobacco control economics, poverty analysis, and fiscal policy. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Witwatersrand, South Africa, and has over 12 years of experience in research policy, engagement, and strategy development. Dr. Adeniran currently serves as the Director of Research at the Center for the Study of the Economies of Africa, where he leads key research initiatives aimed at tackling sustainable development challenges across the continent. He is also a faculty member at the African School of Economics, contributing to the training of the next generation of African economists. Welcome, Dr. Adeniran.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here today.
Our next guest is Mr. Waziri Adio. Mr. Adio is a newspaper columnist, policy enthusiast, and former public official. He's the founder of Agora Policy, a Nigerian think tank and non-profit organization dedicated to developing practical solutions to the country's pressing challenges. Through evidence-based research, purposeful dialogue, and capacity-building initiatives in governance, policy, and advocacy, Agora Policy works to shape and promote effective policies for addressing Nigeria's persistent and emerging issues. Mr. Adio served a 5-year term as the Executive Secretary of the Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, an experience he captured in his memoir, The Arc of the Possible. Over the course of his career, he has held senior roles in several organizations, including contributing editor and editor-at-large at This Day newspapers, publisher of Metropole magazine, special advisor to the President of the Senate, and communications specialist at the United Nations Development Programme. Welcome, Mr. Adio.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
And finally, Professor Obasi. Professor Obasi teaches public administration at the University of Abuja and is currently on sabbatical leave serving at the Aig-Imoukhuede Foundation. He was the University of Abuja Golden Award winner for meritorious service in 2023. Professor Obasi has over 4 decades of experience, having previously lectured at the Usman Danfodio University, Sokoto, University of Nigeria, Nsukka, and the University of Botswana, Gaborone. He's the author of many books, with his latest work titled Nigeria's Policy Response to the COVID-19 Pandemic, which was published in 2023. Welcome, Professor Obasi.
Thank you, Ma. I'm very pleased to be here. It's a pleasure.
Okay, let's get started. Let's start with the big picture. We always hear that governments should make data-driven decisions, but why is this important? I will begin with you, Mr. Adio. You've worked at the intersection of policy, governance, and transparency, especially during your time at NEITI. Why do you believe data should be the cornerstone of public sector reform?
Thank you so much again. Great to be here. I will start with where you stopped, and I will try to expand on that a little bit. I will say that data should be the cornerstone of everything that we do in the public sector, not just in terms of public sector reforms. The whole gamut of governance, of politics around governing public resources should be data driven. We live in a particularly different age now, which is called the age of data, and whoever has the data controls the narrative, and data is king. It should be king in everything that we do. But when you look at how we approach governance or politics as a whole, you see that we do not accord data the priority that it deserves. When you look at the kind of policies that we implement or adopt, or the way we approach governance, you find that most of things are done on the basis of whims or on the basis of recommendations from different actors, rather than is this something that we should be focusing on as a country or as a people? And what are we really trying to achieve? Who is this for? So even in the decision making around what we should be spending, our public resources on, which by the way is not infinite, it's finite. So data is not featuring as prominently as should be featuring. The second thing is that after making the decision about what you want to do, the purpose you want to, the goal you want to achieve, you also need to be tracking things, to be checking, are we on track? Are we achieving the purpose that we set out to achieve? Or are there unintended consequences? And what should we do about that? The last part is that the organizations, the institutions that are supposed to be doing the implementation, right? Are they being held to account? Are they achieving the purpose for which they were set up? And or are they becoming part of the problem? So to give some examples, though not very specific examples, sometimes you hear things like, you need to increase access to education, right? And you're asking yourself, yes, access to education is very important. And by the way, this is something that all societies should work on. But access for whom? And is access an end by itself? What about the quality of the education? So if you start with asking the wrong questions, so you end up taking the wrong decisions. So you end up doing things around building classrooms, rather than focusing on the quality of instruction, the quality of the teachers, and all of that. Sometimes you also hear things like, we just provide incentives for the private sector and everything will be okay. But you can also ask yourself, what kind of incentives should you be providing? And are these incentives really necessary? Or are you leaving money on the table? And, is the incentive really the problem? Would the incentives by themselves be enough to ensure that, you are able to achieve the purpose that you want to achieve? So in most instances, we approach things from the perspective of, this is something that has worked somewhere else. This is something that has been recommended by somebody else. And we're not looking at our own context. We're not asking the people themselves, what exactly should be the priority of government now, and how should government go about it? So if you continue in that line, you will continue to achieve the same results that we've been achieving. So we need to find a different way of approaching how we go about governance, how we approach reform itself, and ensure that we take a different track, which is about looking for evidence to decide, is this what we should be focusing on? What is this supposed to achieve? What will success look like? How do we track the success? And how do we know whether we're on course or off course? The institutions, are they fit for purpose, or are they become part of the problem? And what can we do differently What feedback can we get from the beneficiaries or the larger populace, and how do we do things differently? So basically what I'm saying is that we need to ground our entire approach to policy making, to governance, on evidence, on data, and for us to be able to achieve a different, outcome from the ones that we have been achieving, which everybody agrees that is suboptimal, and we need to do better than we're doing at the moment. I will stop here for that.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Adio. A very comprehensive response. I asked if data should be the cornerstone of public sector reform, and you counted that the entire approach of policy making and governance should be focused on data, not just reforms. Thank you for breaking down your response into 3 different buckets. I heard from that first of all, the decisions that we make have to be data-driven. We have to focus on ensuring that the work that we do, the policies that come from the government are actually focused on addressing issues identified through data. And once the policies are implemented, we use data to hold the government accountable. So data really as a roadmap for governance. It gives us direction, helps us course correct, and ultimately gets us to our destination faster and more efficiently. So we are doing things that are relevant to our context, relevant to our people, and not just, as you said, borrowed from somewhere else. So as not to focus too much on that, let me turn to you, Dr. Adeniran. You are a researcher and an economist. How have you seen data change the policy making landscape, especially in development finance and macroeconomic planning?
Thank you so much. So when we look at, globally, I like to take a global picture to really reflect on this question. Data has changed economics and livelihood in many places, but maybe one crowning jewel of data influencing macroeconomic planning that I always like to talk about is the story of India in 1930s and 1950s. And it's a story of individual and a story of institutions, and how when individuals committed to really driving evidence and data-driven policy, when they actually in an institution that allows for this to grow, it always leads to change and positive change in the economy. So in the Indian case, in 1930s, there is this man called Professor Malanobis. He's established the Indian Statistical Institute, and that institute was a kind of individual initiatives, and from there they were able to pioneer a lot of things that we know today in all the developing countries. For example, they pioneered the use of household survey and collecting it to really track economic indicators. They pioneered the use of computer in economic modeling for economic planning. And also, they were the first set of people to really integrate data system into national economic planning. And what did they get? If you think of India in the 1950s, there were about 370 million people, which is even more than the Nigerian population today. Before they really go into this set of introducing data to really drive the economic planning, because the first 3 years when they had independence in 1947, from 1947 to 1950, the growth was very, very bad, and so they need to rethink the strategy, and they introduced this data-driven approach into the system. And they have this 5 years plan first, 1950 to 1955, where they were thinking that, we should be able to really accelerate our growth to between 10 and 12%. To their surprise, they were able to deliver 18% growth. So it's a story that shows you that when we really integrate data into our processes. It enabled and it shaped things in many ways. One example I also could cite is if you look at world global poverty indicators for the last 3 decades, except the year that we have COVID-19, poverty has been declining. And one of the success story of that is actually measurement. When we begin to measure poverty, we begin to know that how big the problem is. We begin to really coordinate our action and activities around what we can do to really stem the problem. And for that reason, so data acts as a way to really unify everyone. We begin to really see the picture from both sides. So, for example, if you say, education is not working, if you mention that, economic development, we are having weak growth, most times everybody is looking at different parts. Some people are looking at fruit prices, some people are looking at all sorts of things. But when we have a kind of data that ties the narrative very well, I think it then enables us to really know what should we prioritize in policy. And when we know what to prioritize, sometimes in terms of intervention and innovation, it could come from government, it could come from people, and so we could actually, as a nation, we can start working together. Anytime I look at the story of data-driven model and really think of what India was able to achieve, currently they are the fastest growing economy with 1.4 billion people, which is even more than the whole population of Africa. So if they could achieve it with that size, with their own challenges, we could also achieve it if we really think very well. But there are many important things to really think and take into action in order to achieve this. For me, one of the central lessons is that let's look at data as a first step. It is the evidence that we generate and insight we bring out of that data that is very crucial. So it's fine to collect data, but processing it into information and intelligence for action is critical. And for us to really achieve that, really generating information or intelligence for action, we need investment in people and technology. I was referring to the Indian case whereby they were the first sort of people. Computer entered into India because of just that. So it just really tells you the way government really think how important this is. So government have to invest in new technology. They have to invest in their new in their people, and that's actually it takes quality kind of environment for all of this to be individual institution working together to ensure that we are not just really generating data, we are not just generating information, but we're also using it in terms of action. I think another lesson I really like to really draw from that is also the importance of local ownership and leadership in data and evidence generation. It's really widely different by the local. It's not about really depending on these multilateral institutions. And I think if you look at Nigerian story in this regard, one data that is really crucial to look at is the World Bank National Statistical Capacity Index that track quality of data that is coming from the country and quality of institution of data. Nigerian score is around 60.9. The global average is around 73.5. It just shows that we are doing below the global average. Most countries tend to actually do much better, around 80, 90, and in terms of quality of data they collect. And one thing you'd see in terms of personal experience, you go to even our statistical institution, and you find out that some of our micro data sets that should be used for planning, because of sometimes reliance on this multilateral, the big data, the one that really tells you the story about individual, not just the big picture that says, poverty is 80%, that's an endline story. But you want to really drive as a policy, you want to look at it, what number makes up that 30? Where are the geography of people that are poor? What age group? What are they doing? You want to know this kind of very nitty-gritty. For policy interventions, sometimes we don't have access to it. So if we don't have local ownership and leadership, sometimes data doesn't sometimes translate into evidence and into action that can really support development. But so I think the pathway is, to me, kind of clear. We need to ensure that we generate, we have this data. And when we have this data, we need to really incorporate it into our policy implementation process such that evidence guides our implementation process. And as we really implement, the importance of data also come very handy, because more data tells us whether we are on track or off track. Data also supports public demand for accountability, because people are saying, okay, we are not moving in the direction we should be moving. It also helps to coordinate the activities of various actors, their actions, and ensure that when we are actually thinking about planning, when we are thinking about economic development, we are doing the right things. We are in a world that is really changing. Development financing is shrinking very fast, both external, even the domestic mobilization, it's a challenge. What do we need to do? We need to really make sure we optimize our interventions and actions, and it is only data that can enable us to do this. So I think there are many stories out there that shows that data can contribute to development. However, I think in our own settings, Nigeria, there are stories of how people using data. I mean, when we look at monetary policy and look at the MPC meetings, you see how people actually look at data and use in terms of what direction the economy should go. But these are kind of really pocket of effectiveness, I would say. Do we really have this at every layers of our decision making, in the education sector, in health sector, and all where we make decisions? If we don't have this access to this very important ingredient for decision making, I think our decision making is based on guess and try and error, and most times it might not end well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adeniran, for the very insightful examples you gave of how India really drove growth after independence by focusing on data. You said something that was very, very important. Well, you said a lot of important things, but a couple of things that stood out for me is how data acts as a way to unify, helps to determine what to prioritize in terms of intervention and innovation, and really helps us to focus. But most importantly, that it's very important that countries own their data. So local ownership of data and leadership in data gathering, and not over-reliance on multilaterals, because as you rightly said, when we need to then begin to implement, if we're overly reliant on outside bodies, we may not necessarily have the access or ownership to the big data that is required for policy intervention, which brings me very, very seamlessly to the Aig-Imoukhuede Foundation's Public Sector Performance Index. So this is a homegrown index that is being developed with the a Nigerian Economic Summit Group, the NESG, designed to track how well public institutions are delivering value to citizens across a number of key performance indicators. And it's not just about ranking, but about creating a feedback loop for change and policy implementation, which is something that both Dr. Adeniran and Mr. Adio touched on, that when you have data that measures performance, you can hold people accountable, you can course correct, and so on and so forth. So let me put this next question to you, Professor Obasi. You are leading this project at the Aig-Imoukhuede Foundation. Can you unpack the index for us? What exactly does it measure? How is it designed? And what are the outcomes you hope it will drive?
Thank you very much, Ma. Let me make a few statements deriving from Dr. Adeniran's provoked facts. I start by conceptual clarification. Data, what is it? We're talking about power of data. What is data? Collection of facts, figures, and symbols. And is also seen as unprocessed information. So there is a whole lot of relationship between facts, statistics. Statistics processes the facts. Facts is raw data. That's the raw data is what we call facts here now. And statistics processes it. From there we get to information, which is processed data. And it is important that the data has integrity and, of course, of high quality. Otherwise, you made the mistake of calling a tree a forest. And in Nigeria, you call a small forest big Sambisa. You know what that will mean? If you call a small forest Sambisa, which is larger than some states. And so in statistics, we try to hold data sacred. Why? Because it's important that this quality is maintained. And that leads to the point where we talk about the public sector performance index. The background to it is the low ranking of Nigeria in certain measures. Look at HGI, Human Development Indicator, which, of course, 2024 Nigeria ranked at 157 out of 185, and that has been the lot of our history in the past. So the conception of the Aig-Imoukhuede project, the index project, was based against this background, and the essence is to improve or to enhance effectiveness, and a whole lot of things out of it. And trying to unpack the project, the whole of things. What does it measure? There are 5 pillars: input, process, attributes, output, and outcome. And within these 5 pillars, we now have all other, what we may call big indicators, which are, for instance, for output, we have human and financial. These are inputs that go into whatever we are going to do. That's the input side. The next is processing. In the processing aspect, you have policy making. You now have human resource that was an input. How it is managed becomes important. Finance, that is an input. How it is the budget and fiscal input, how it is managed now becomes important. And we can talk about other things that are within the process zone, like procurement, which are very important. And so when we leave processing, we go to attribute, because it's important to make the point that you may be well resourced, but if you have poor attributes, you do poor management, and that will affect your output. So it's important we recognize this symbiotic relationship within this. They must work in harmony. A well-resourced NDA, for instance, NDS, for instance, must be also well managed. So that's where attribute comes in. Issues about transparency and accountability, responsiveness. You talk about inclusiveness, participation. These attributes are very, very important. Effectiveness and efficiency, they are very important. And when you leave there and go to output, what are you talking about? The whole aspect of government functions are now being looked at. You also now talk about infrastructure, very important. You talk about issues of agriculture. Agriculture is treated under economy, very, very important. You talk about security and defense, very, very important. So when we look at the gamut of the output, it covers all the things that the governments do, but they are very critical ones that are used as big indicators, what we call in research as variables, from where we now get a lot of indicators. And so when we move out of output, we talk of outcome. The outcomes now, we'll be talking about long-term effects of the output. Dr. Adeniran measured, I think it's Adio who talked about access to education and the rest of them. Very important. You may have built many schools, that's output. But what did it bring as outcome in terms of learning, in terms of performance? Those years, for instance, Obasi started to change the narrative in Anambra education system, use private schools, use town hall meetings, organizations to channel resources for effective use, bypass the bureaucracy where there was a lot of leakages. And before you know it, over time, outcome improved. Anambra started doing well in education, which was not there before. And that's the aspect of outcome. So these 5 pillars form the basis of the things that we measure. And there are a lot of indicators that are involved in the things we measure. So when we talk about what we measure, we can also talk about the component that has to do with methodology. We have three key survey instruments. One of them, very important, is self-administered by the NDS, and that contains the input, the output, the outcome. We have one instrument that's dealing with that. We now have another instrument, also self-administered, dealing with processes and attributes, which I had already itemized. And then you now have a perception survey by CSOs, which will now try to give us a counterbalancing knowledge about what these people, if they overrated themselves, you can now have an independent view about how they feel. And so that's in essence what the PSPI is measuring. But it's a unique methodology. Why? Some index builders concentrate on secondary data and in fact use outcome data only to measure construct their index. But the uniqueness of Aig-Imoukhuede PSPI index is that it uses both secondary and primary data. It generates the data right from the source, as raw as it is, and then processes it before you can now begin to talk about its usefulness in information and impact in policy and decision making. And that's to us is a very worthy project to accomplish, because it will contribute to make a big contribution in the space. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Obasi, for talking us through the different aspects of the index and the methodology. And then you just touched on an important point at the end that I want you to expand on. So you said how will it be used? What do you think, from your own perspective, the data that is gathered through this index, what do you think it can be used for by government stakeholders, not just federal, but also state and local? And what role can it play in shaping institutional behaviors, policy priorities, and accountability in an ideal world?
Excellent. You know, the presence of data gives a roadmap. There was a professor, and an old professor, I don't think he's alive now, Professor Wolfgang Stolper. He wrote a book on Nigeria titled Planning Without Facts. 1960, published in 1960 by the Harvard University Press, the first to publish it. Many other press houses have published it. And what was his experience? He was among those who helped us to develop the first development plan, 1962-1968. After Professor Stolper finished that work, his experience on the process, he now wrote the book, Planning Without Facts. It has a title on resource allocation. But the point that is being underscored here is that if we don't generate these facts, the stakeholders, whether at the federal or subnational levels, will not be properly guided. They will also be grouping in the dark, and they are likely to plan without facts. It's easy to say, oh, we are evidence-driven, and you begin to ask yourself, how is that evidence-driven done? You begin to wonder where the evidence was gotten, and sometimes it's in methods, sometimes it's poorly generated, and that's why if at the federal level the Aig-Imoukhuede Foundation gives a role model on how to develop an index of performance, I think it would be a green light for states to follow and to use it in their own planning. Secondly, very important, CSOs would be able to now know where there are gaps. Remember, the index is a diagnostic as well as a therapeutic tool. Very important to note. It tries to diagnose what is wrong. It tries also to cure, in quote, bring out areas that need support. And closing the gap, you make amendment, that's you cure what the problem is. CSOs, for instance, will be able to key in and see these are areas of gaps. And even our foundation, of course, is already there. You're discovering the facts by yourself, by the research you carry, and the rest of them. But other organizations will be able to know, oh, these are areas that gaps exist. They can get grants to be able to partner with the government to be able to close those gaps. So the use of the index is huge. It's not restricted to government even alone at all. But it's the starting point that government will begin to use them to change the narrative about what they do. All the attributes we mentioned, we expect that qualitatively they will improve and lead to transformation. That's the hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Obasi. Yes, we ourselves, even as owners of the data, generators of the data, will use it in developing our own interventions because, as you know, we intervene, we support projects and so on and so forth. So we can design our interventions to help to close some of those gaps, as you said. Thank you very much, Professor Obasi. So let's build on that. Mr. Adio, as someone who has led reform-focused institutions, what, in your opinion, are the biggest barriers to making tools like the performance index or the data generated from the performance index actually usable in practice? What is keeping many governments from closing the gap between collecting data and acting on it?
Okay, thank you very much again. So the first thing is that we shouldn't assume that because there's an index, then everything will just flow from there. It would be nice if there's an index and there's buy-in from all the different stakeholders and everybody does their part. But in the ideal world, in the real world that we live in, that might not be the case. So I listened to Professor Obasi. A lot of thoughts and effort, have gone into this. So this is nice. But a lot of work needs to be done to make sure that people are aware of the index and what it can be used for, and they are also primed to play their own parts. There are many indexes out there. Some of them make some difference, some of them do not. It's important to bear that in mind. That's the first thing. The second thing is that in terms of government, there are certain constraints that can stand in the way. One is the issue of capacity. The capacity to collect the data, to understand the data, to be able to make appropriate decision on the data. So the fact that there's data doesn't mean that everyone will reach the right conclusion or would know what to do, or will have the stomach to do what is necessary. The second thing, which is the third thing, which is also related to that, is the will to do the right thing. The right thing to do, but it might not be politically expedient to do it. Sometimes that the people who are working in a particular place shouldn't be there, but there are some concerns about what do you do with them. Some other concerns around all those fault lines that we have in the country, around religious considerations, ethnic considerations, regional considerations, and all of that. So it's not, even when people know the right thing to do, sometimes politics gets in the way. Like I said, it's important to do this work and to do some sensitization and disaggregation around it, because the different stakeholders will have different roles to play, and to let them know the roles that they have to play and to kind of give them the incentives to play the roles effectively. Within government and outside of government, there will be important things to be done, and you can only achieve the desired outcome if the different parts, play their own role. Sometimes there are also issues of resources. The right thing to do, but you just do not have the economic resources to do them. resources, capacity, will. Some of those are some of the things that could be the constraints within government. The other stakeholders also understanding what they need to do and having the capacity to do it, because everything is not, we don't agree. These people are, like this or like that. It should be that even the other actors should have the capacity to be able to engage the governance, the policy process in an effective and efficient way. So those are also to re-echo the fact that it's important that you are doing this work, and I think this will make a lot of difference. But don't assume that because it's important work, it will just speak for itself, or the work will just do itself. You need to create a lot of awareness around it. You need to ensure that there's adequate buy-in, including that people also have what it takes or the skills to negotiate the trade-offs that they might need to accommodate, or they might need to implement in ensuring that they do what is necessary.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much for that very comprehensive response and a lot of thought-provoking information you provided. And I guess this is based on your own experience that you need, first of all, capacity, you need resources, you need will, political will, as it were. On our part, we're really developing this index, as I said, with the NASG, but we're also working quite closely with different government stakeholders just to carry them along. So even the National Bureau of Statistics, the Office of the Head of the Civil Service of the Federation, we've had conversations with CDCU and other very relevant parties who we envisage have the play such critical roles in policy implementation and using data that it's important for us to carry them along. Capacity, of course, is something that we are very focused on developing as the Aig-Imoukhuede Foundation. And one of the things that we want to do is build the capacity of the public servants to understand the data, to really be able to critically engage with it and get lessons from it and implement policy from it. And of course, yes, the elephant in the room is, even if everything falls in line, do we have the resources to implement? So Dr. Adeniran, let me address this next question to you. Mr. Adio raised a lot of different levers that need to be pulled for data to be used. In your own experience working on educational systems and development programs across Africa, have you engaged with any of these different factors? So political will, capacity to even engage with the data, a lack of resources and so forth. And where do you think that we need to intervene first?
Thank you so much. I think this is a very tough question because all of these actually are very important. We need technical capacity, we need resources, we need political will, but which one needs to come first? For me, I think based on experience, especially working on the education sector in Africa, I've come to the conclusion that political will is a priority. Of course, there are many schools of thought that believe that political will is a nebulous term, not well defined. But I mean, not going to the technicality of what it's, how to define it. We need commitment from the highest policy institution in order for us to actually start making waves. For example, we can have high technical capacity. If the political will is not there, nothing will work, but we can have low capacity, if there is political will, things begin to change. Of course, that means we might not need to say, let's start that investment in technical capacity, or also let's really see where the resources could come from. So really looking at, education sector, for example, and when you ask the question, what's the big problem in education sector, you ask access and learning, and there's a really disparity around learning. But why don't we really, what can we do? Why don't we sometimes do the right action when it comes to really doing the right investment? It all boils down to the fact that most times our policy or our politicians don't want to actually make this big commitment to what they want to do. For example, there is a political economic fact that they benefit from the opacity in data. When the data is not open, there is a whole body of work on open data. When data is not open, they tend to benefit. For example, you could really empower 5,000 youth and use that as an evidence of job creation, or you could really deliver palliative and use that as an evidence of poverty reduction. If there is no data that really said otherwise, you can actually go and get away with it. So sometimes there is this very broad kind of benefit, but the benefits of really data is about you making best decision. Of course, when you have this data, it's also a problem. So I don't want us to really see data as it's good, but actually it's painting the picture there's a problem. And when there's a problem, government will be flanked, government will be criticized, but it's in a way how you respond to that challenges that actually it's the process of governance. And that's why what Aig is doing on this public data sector is very important and relevant. It will show us clearly what the problem is. It will then use and can be used as a basis to engage policymaking in terms of the right set of direction and what to start thinking about. Most times reforms can be very painful, and when it comes to something that you need to do that is the right thing to do, political exigency might not really support that. And again, data can help, because if there's transparency, there's accountability, we can actually have a kind of joining in terms of conversation around how much we have moved. We might not achieve the problem, but we might have moved from, for example, we're going to 10, but we have moved from, say, 2 to 4 over time. People see progress, but not just that everybody just say, oh, I've done this, but no claim, no basis, no even justification for why should that be the priority. So I really want to strongly argue that political will is the big elephant in the room. How do we really achieve political will? It's also a big conversation we need to have, and I think that's why public demand is a way to generate political will. And how do you do that? When we have this kind of evidence, it's in a way going to be a kind of, I don't want to call it name and shaming, but it will really put pressure on institutions to see in terms of they need to move in the right direction. So that's where we really engage with public, especially CSOs, institutions doing research, and also public, media and all of that. If we can actually really use this evidence to really galvanize public demand, I think that can generate the political will to really move us in the right direction. I think that's what we might be really, why this is important, why the work you're doing, it's going to be crucial, and it's the extent to which it galvanizes the public demand.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adeniran. Mr. Adio, I'm going to turn to you. So Dr. Adeniran said political will was the most important, but that political will can be shifted through public demand, and public demand comes from obviously the public, but then CSOs, media. You have a lot of experience in the CSO field, in media, and so forth. So what advice would you give us at the Aig-Imoukhuede Foundation in terms of trying to push out the information or the data that we gather through this public sector performance index? How do you recommend that we engage with the public and we engage with the civil society to help to drive this public demand that will push political will? Thank you.
Yes, I think this will be very important. I use an analogy often, which is that there are always two sides to this equation. There's the supply side and there's the demand side. And if we wait for those on the demand side to out of the goodness of their heart to do the right thing, maybe a few might, but most will not. In the first instance, they don't have the incentives to do so. In the second instance, there are groups that have vested interest in sustaining the status quo. And the only way that they can begin to yield ground is not just because there's an evidence staring them in the face, but also because there's pressure and consistent and persistent pressure, and pressure applied in the right way. So that is why I think it will be very important to engage with civil society, with the media, and other actors, to actually own this beyond the foundation itself. To treat this the same way they will treat, the UNDP Human Development Index or the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index, and others like that, they eagerly wait for them and they take it forward. They take these indexes forward. But that also will not happen by itself. You have to have a clear plan to engage with them, to make sure that they understand what this index is about, what is designed to measure, the robustness of its methodology, and for them to see that this is something that is useful and something that they can take on and they can use in their different ways, to engage with those that they have purchased with. So definitely, this is important work, but you also have to ensure that you identify those who can help to take this forward and identify the channels through which you can reach them and get them, to understand what this is about, what role they have to play, and how to play the role. I mentioned capacity the other time. We have so many organizations working in the civil society space, and a lot of them work on in the area of advocacy. But advocacy itself, that is also not evidence-based, that is not data-driven, that is not data-backed. It's more or less like just passion. Passion is good. It has its own place, but passion, joined to logic or joined with logic would and data in this instance will stand a better chance. So don't expect that once this is done, people will just take it and run with it. You have to reach out. You have to brief them. You have to ensure that they understand it. You have to also be ready to answer some questions about. Some people might, also have questions about the index itself, about how is it different from other indexes that they are familiar with, and how is this actually even measuring what you set out to achieve, and whether the indicators will apply to all the various agencies at the 3 tiers of government, and all of that, So making some investment in ensuring that there's adequate understanding of what this is about, and people are convinced that this is a very useful tool, and they also have the tools, to be able to take this forward. I think that would be quite useful to ensure that it takes a life of its own. You are not just alone with this, and others are also not just talking about the tool or the index, but they're also using the index in a way that would come together and achieve the purpose that you intended to achieve.
Thank you so much. Amazing. A lot of very good advice there that I'm sure Professor Obasi is listening to very intently, and we will definitely apply. Okay, so this has been a very, very rich and engaging conversation. We talked about data, and for me, the biggest takeaway is that data is central to governance. So it's not just about reform, it is the foundation of all governance. And when we know where we stand, we can move forward with purpose, with focus, and with accountability. So to our brilliant guests, Mr. Waziri, Dr. Adeniran, and Professor Obasi, thank you for sharing your insights, and thank you for sharing your expertise with the very important work that you do in the public sector. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. We hope this episode helped you see data not as something distant or technical, but as a practical tool that drives real, meaningful change. At the Aig-Imoukhuede Foundation, we believe that data is not just a tool, it is a pathway to trust, transformation, and true impact. And we invite policymakers, technocrats, citizens to join us in not just recognizing the importance of data, but actually using it to drive change in Africa's public sector. So don't forget to follow us on social media, share this episode, and stay tuned for the launch of the Public Sector Performance Index later this year. Until next time, my name is Aig-Imoukhuede, and this has been The Power of Data.